there, it's Christy Lewis with Christy Lewis Reviews Books Worth Your Time, and I'm here with my Nonfiction November and my Buzzword Readathon 2019 wrap-ups. So most of the books that I read for these two readathons were books that I had already started, and the rest were books that I started but didn't actually finish. It's kind of a weird in-between sort of readathon wrap-up, but I do have some books to talk about. So, let's get started. The first book that I read for Nonfiction November was The Hebrew Bible, a translation with commentary by Robert Alter, and I picked this up because I'm interested in the Hebrew perspective on a lot of controversial things in Christian academia. I listen to the Ben Shapiro show a lot, and he has a really different interpretation on certain things, and I'm just really interested in hearing that point of view. Not that I think that it's all correct or anything, but I do want to hear who has it and why. I didn't get super deep into this, so this is the first 5 books. It's about the Pentateuch, and I just read some parts on Genesis about the Nephilim, the giants, and the flood, and a few other things like that. And this author takes the very metaphorical route when thinking and talking about the Bible. He treats it very much as like a piece of literature, and he's always looking for literary devices. Like, for example, he holds to the documentary hypothesis, which says that there are multiple authors with differing purposes and styles and stuff like that, and he refers to the cherubim as suitable imagery. So I don't know if that means he believes they were there or not. I definitely don't have a problem with the more mythical elements of Genesis. I know the first 11 chapters people tend to debate over whether it's metaphorical or, figurative at all, or just very literal, and I'm probably somewhere in the middle, but I don't have a problem with things like cherubim because, if God can create the world, he can make creatures like cherubim. I just don't have a problem with that. I know atheists are like, oh, that's impossible because we don't see any of that now, but if you don't just accept certain things, then you're not going to get very far in the Bible. And I feel like there's a lot of things that he probably wouldn't accept that I would. And maybe that's because I'm not an academic. I think there are a lot of really academic interpretations of the Bible that are still valid, and that people have faith and whatnot. He's written commentaries on, I think the whole Bible, or at least the whole Old Testament. I'm going to check out his commentary on the prophets because I'm very interested in his ideas on certain prophecies in Isaiah and Jeremiah, which to me seem really messianic, but to obviously a lot of Jews do not seem that way, and I'm just interested in their perspective on that. This guy's won a zillion awards, so I'm not even gonna bother reading to you his biography, but he's very well known in biblical academia. And I haven't read Madeleine L'Engle's Genesis trilogy, but I kind of think that she probably views Genesis very similar to this author. I would love to read the Genesis trilogy by Madeleine L'Engle. She has a really interesting perspective on a lot of things. She has no problem at all with evolution. She was an Episcopalian, and she just came to the faith very differently than I did, so we're sort of on the same journeys here, but I don't know if we're gonna end up in quite the same place on the spectrum of figurative and literal. I'm definitely not as literal as some people I know, but I'm more literal than this. And the next book that I read, you guys are gonna get tired of hearing me talk about the Bible today, was actually one that I started in not even October. I think it was September that I started it in, but it was an ebook, and I just had so much trouble finishing it because it was really boring. And that book was Show Them No Mercy. It's 4 views on the Canaanite genocide, and I enjoyed this because I did end up coming up with my own point of view on it, so that was good. But as far as this series, which I love this series where it lays out all these points of view on different important things about the Bible and theology and stuff like that. This is probably my least favorite of the volumes I've read. I think this is my 3rd or 4th. I think part of the reason why this wasn't my favorite was because so many of the points of view seemed exactly the same to me with minor differences, and they all said that in their conclusions. I agree with everything but these 2 minor things. So it was kind of why am I reading 4 views that are actually 2 views? One of them, regardless, did explain himself better, I think, than the other ones, even though by that point it was the last one. All of his examples I had read multiple times in the other points of view, so I just basically skimmed those. I just feel like it wasn't arranged the best. I feel like his should have been first, then maybe one other view. It would be okay if they were just 2 views on the Canaanite genocide, because that's all they gave us, but no, it had to be 4, and you had to needlessly thicken this book that took me forever to read because I could only get it on a Hoopla ebook, and Hoopla ebooks are annoying if you've never read one, but I'm glad that it was there because it was from the library, and if the library hadn't had that. It would have been a pain for me to get a copy of the book. I wouldn't recommend this book, although it did, like I said, give me an opinion, which is what I was ultimately looking for. I just felt like it could have been gotten easier. Basically, what makes sense to me is that the New Testament and the Old Testament are in continuity on this subject because bad things happen to everybody and God allows that to happen. Babies get sick and die. He actually killed David's baby for David's sin. So the fact that like kids and women and children were destroyed in this Canaanite genocide, it's kind of like more of the same. We don't really understand why it had to happen that way. We don't understand why anybody has to suffer, particularly when it's not their fault. It's hard to understand that in general, not just with this issue. But even Christ, who is obviously like held up as an example of the most loving human being ever, in the New Testament, eschatologically, he comes back to destroy the earth. People will die. This isn't really that much different from that. However, what is also emphasized in this book is that this was for specific people at a specific time. This does not mean that wars in general or genocide from anybody is ever acceptable to God, or that God tells us that we should do that. That was only for Israel, only at that time. There were specific reasons for that, and there's specific reasons why it will never happen that way again. So that's really important to emphasize. Like the Crusades and like other genocides that have happened, the Bible is not condoning that. So I do feel a little bit better about it. It still bothers me, but I think that's part of being human. That's why I'm not God. I don't understand everything that he does, and I just have to be okay with certain things that I'm not like okay with, but I trust him because he's good. So that's essentially the point of view that I got out of reading this book. I read the Book of Proverbs during this readathon. That was fun. I read the Bible almost every day, and so that was a pretty short book that I just went through. I'm calling it nonfiction because if you went to the library, you would find the Book of Proverbs in nonfiction, because that's where the Bible would be. I really enjoy Proverbs because if you're in a hurry, you can go through and just pick one for that day, and you're good. You've done your Bible reading. But if you want, there's also Proverbs in there that are kind of weird that you have to dig into. I just love doing that. When I have the time, I just sit around and read commentaries on weird verses. I think like anybody could read it and really enjoy it. It's not like one that would be really hard to read, like Joshua or Leviticus, or Numbers, It's like, yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in here. I think anybody would say that if they read it. Highly recommended. 5 stars for the Book of Proverbs. There's 2 books that I started that are nonfiction this month. Actually, there's 3 books, but I'm not going to talk about one of them because I literally read like less than a chapter. But these other ones, I read a couple. One of those is Decision Making and the Will of God, and this is by one of my husband's professors when he went to Multnomah Bible in Portland for his college. Garry Friesen, that's the name of his professor. So I'm reading this one because I finished the one on the Canaanite genocide. And this one talks about the traditional view of the will of God, which is that there's like this center of the will of God for your life that you're always aiming for. There's always like, anytime you make a decision, there's a best decision that you can make, and then there's like every other decision. The closer you get to the dot, the center of the circle of God's will, the closer you are to God's will, and the better your life will turn out. That's kind of the idea of the traditional view. And he is like disagreeing with that because he says, it's not like every decision seems like it's planned out by God for us. Like sometimes I think he leaves it up to us, and he takes it even a little farther than that. I think he's saying like God doesn't have an individual plan for your life. It's like he has a sovereign will, which is that takes in account of like everything that's happening in the world. And then there's a moral will, which is what's revealed in the Bible, which is how to live your life in general for Christians. And then there's the individual will, which he's saying does not exist. You make your own life, and you can decide to follow God's sovereign and moral wills as much as he has revealed to us. And if you do those things, then your own individual will, you have some freedom in there. God gives you the freedom to choose. He doesn't like lay out the best path. And he used the example of like picking a college, because this was like a real problem for him when he was picking his college back in the day. He was like, God, which college do I go to? And he was just like, Am I just not hearing the Holy Spirit? Like, what's wrong with me? And I can relate to this somewhat. I'm such an indecisive person. I can just agonize over it forever. So far it's been a little bit freeing for me, just being like, just try it. And I think if it's not the right one, it'll make that clear to me. That's not exactly what he said, but that's kind of what I've gotten out of it so far. I'm only on page 63. Oh, and he does have like all kinds of scriptures in here that he goes through, so it's not like he's just making these wild claims. He does have like tons and tons of scriptures, and I'm still going through the chapter that's like addressing some of the ones like in the Psalms. I'm enjoying it so far. And then the next book that I'm reading is Democracy in America by Alexis de Toqueville. I am like about 20 pages away from finishing book 1, part 1. And this is like reading a government textbook, essentially. And it goes back in time, you know, history. This was published, when was this published? This is a really interesting one. I'm really excited to continue on with this one. I'm planning on finishing it, but I'm only on page 139. So far, this first half has been about centralization, impeachment, general powers of the 3 branches of government on the federal, state, and local levels, and how they interact, how they make decisions, how they were set up. And his theory is that it all kind of started in Puritan America, because it was like a place where everybody was essentially equal. There was no like class, whereas down in the South there was more gentry arriving, you know, and kind of setting up shop there. But in America there was not like the whole landed estate with the nobles, and you know, it wasn't feudal at all. And Puritan America surprisingly had a lot of democratic laws, and he kind of talks about that. It's just been really interesting. There's been so many great quotes. I've already made part of a video analyzing it so far because it's so relevant right now to our politics. I just love the quotes. Let me like find a good one to read for you. When the American republics begin to degenerate, I believe that one will be able to recognize it easily. It will be enough to see if the number of political judgment rises. And by political judgments, he means like impeachments. He says like in Europe it was a lot harder to topple somebody out of power because you could use the whole penal code in punishing him, so you didn't want to like be too harsh about it. But here in America, the Senate and the House of Representatives cannot use the penal code to punish people who are abusing their power. They can only make sure they never get into power again. It's a lot easier to impeach people here without the penalty of the penal code. He just talks about these really interesting things. So I've already made a video. We'll see if I ever get it edited and put up. It just takes me forever to edit, but I would really like to do that. I'm really loving this. It's taking me forever. It's a very, very thick, slow read, but really just vitally interesting to me. I really enjoy politics. I just don't like to make my own political judgments, like really strong statements, because I didn't study political science, so I just have no right at all to really share my opinion. And I really hate it when people make political statements and they don't know what they're talking about. Politics are really so complicated that unless you study it for a living and you get into the nitty-gritty, boring details of policy, you're just gonna confuse yourself and confuse everybody else. And then it gets all angry and spirited, and it's really become just like a circus, and it has divided us so badly. I just hope we can kind of come together and figure this out. And then there's Buzzword Readathon 2019. For this one, I read 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I actually was listening to this one on audiobook and I didn't finish it. It's a time travel story about a guy who goes back in time to try and stop the assassination of JFK. I really wanted to like this one because as I was listening to it, I just felt like it wasn't as hard to listen to as like It. When I was listening to It, it was just, there were so many homophobic characters, and I know I sound juvenile, but there were so many bad words. It was just too dark for me, so I ended up stopping with It. But this one didn't hit me like that at all. There was a lot of darkness, and it was kind of fun because this book went back to Garry, which is where It took place. Unfortunately, I think Stephen King just might not be the author for me. I just don't really like his style. It's so long and rambling, and I just unfortunately was bored with this one. I probably got maybe a third of the way through. I don't know exactly what page. It's not like it was all bad. I hate to say this because he's like so many people's like favorite author and they just love it, and this premise sounded really interesting. I don't know, guys. I might try Salem's Lot. I really want to make it work. I've tried so many different books by him, and the only one I liked was his writing memoir. And I loved that one. It was great. I've listened to it like 3 times now. Maybe Salem's Lot will be the one for me. I've heard it's creepy and good, so I'm gonna try it. Maybe next October. And then the final book that I read for Buzzword Readathon was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I read that book like super fast in the last 2 days of the readathon. It was brilliant. I am really glad that I picked it up. It's a post-apocalyptic world. It won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 2016, and I think that's with good reason. It's really quite carefully put together, which I love about a book. I love it when it's so careful that you can't really figure out everything that's going on, but there's kind of a moment when it clicks and you're like, oh my gosh, no way. So the earth is broken. There are super volcanoes and earthquakes shaking things up, and when that happens, it's called a fifth season. And they completely disrupt civilizations, meaning there's civilization buried on top of civilization on this planet. There's so many ones that have died before, but there's usually a surviving remnant of the people who kind of go on and keep trying to live. There are 4 kinds of humanoid life forms. There's the Origines, who is mostly who we follow in the book. There's 3 characters, and you know that all 3 of them are Origines. So one is like a little girl who's just being picked up for training as an Origine. One is a breeder who is forced to breed with other powerful Origines so that more will be created. They're kind of controlled in this society because they can so easily set off earthquakes that everybody kind of fears and hates them and their powers, and they're really misunderstood. She's basically forced to breed with this guy. And then there's a 3rd character who is narrated in the 2nd person, and this is also an Origine, and her children are Origines, and she has just found her son dead in her house, and she knows that her husband killed the kid because her husband found out that the kid was an Origine. That is really sad, and I think that's the perspective that you start out with, so it just like grabs your heart right away. But all of the stories are really good for, I thought, right from the beginning. They were all really compelling immediately, right off the bat. It was just so well put together. I had trouble a little bit connecting with the characters, and I know people have criticized, you know, young white booktubers for saying, oh, I can't connect with these people of color, you know. A lot of the characters I think are people of color, but I don't think that's why I didn't connect with them emotionally. I think my problem was just that it's kind of hard when there's a book that like nobody's values are anything like mine. When I don't feel like I'm at all represented in a book, it's hard for me to really connect with it. And I know that sounds really bad, but I just feel like out of an entire book of people, shouldn't there be somebody who's like a little bit like me? Which I know is exactly what people of color have been saying, and I'm really glad that there are books that are kind of filling that need. I just see myself so rarely represented in books these days. So it was a little bit hard for me to connect with these characters because I was just like, yeah, that's not what I would do. But for the most part, that wasn't a problem because it was just disaster after disaster, and it's like, what else do? You just kind of deal with the disaster. It was really curiosity about the world building that compelled me to keep reading this book. I was just so curious. I just wanted to know all the book's secrets, and I still do. This is a trilogy, and I'm so curious about the world building still, but I don't think I'm going to continue it simply because recently I stopped reading the Outlander series because the really explicit sex scenes just kind of started to bother me, particularly after I watched the show. It was just like, why am I watching this? I don't even like that. You know, I like everything else about Outlander. I think they're great stories, but there are great stories out there that don't have that, and so I'd rather just like look for those so that I can enjoy them 100% 5 stars. And that's kind of the problem I had with this book. Not that it's anything like Outlander, because this had like 1 full sex scene, just 1, but it was pretty explicit, and I don't know, I just feel like there will probably be more of that kind of stuff coming up. And I know that's a silly reason for not reading something that I otherwise loved. That's just how I feel right now. I just feel a little bit turned off by that. It was also my first time reading, I think, about polyamory, so that was an experience. But again, I think that most people aren't bothered by those things at all. The voice is fantastic, the structure is amazing. I can't really recommend this book highly enough. If explicit sex doesn't bother you, then go for it. Honestly, I think it's more of a personal preference thing, and like I have some go-to authors that just never really have that. I tend to stay in my comfort zone reading older books and like Brandon Sanderson, you know, or like sometimes young adult books, they didn't used to have that kind of explicit stuff in it. So I just tend to stay in those zones. I don't think I'm going to rate it because I don't think my rating would be quite fair. I'll just leave you with that. I really did enjoy it. And oh, and another thing, I also read Black Leopard, Red Wolf, like part of it. I tried it and it was so, I really hated that. I couldn't even get through the first couple chapters. It was so awful, and I feel like N.K. Jemisin is talking about some of the same messages in her book, only she does it like so way much better. Oh, she just knows when to put the horrible, and it's sparingly. You don't need a lot in order to have that affect you. And she just does that so well. She balances everything out so well in this book, as opposed to Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which was like unreadable to me. And I know that's not what any of the critics say, but if you check out the reviews of like young women, that's like what all of the young women say, almost. They're all just like kind of disgusted by that book, just so you know. As far as socially conscious literature goes, I think this one did a fantastic job, 10,000 times better than Black Leopard, Red Wolf, and I would recommend this much more highly. And I forgot to mention that I did not complete the NaNoWriMo 50,000 word goal. I didn't even complete my NaNoWriMo 30,000 word goal, although I got pretty close. I think that's actually decent, because if I were like doing NaNoWriMo again, I would probably give myself a really easy filming and editing month as far as YouTube goes. But this month I had so many sick days, not like cold sick, but like days where I just was really feeling the arthritis problems, and I couldn't work. And I was on a new medicine as well, which had some crazy side effects. That, on top of the editing, on top of some nutso computer problems, just turned out to not be the ideal month for NaNoWriMo for me, but I'm so happy with how far I've gotten. I'm really close to finishing my draft, and I'm hoping that in the next two days I can actually finish my draft, and I'm going to look for a critique partner as well tomorrow. That's how I did on NaNoWriMo. If you did any writing this month, do let me know in the comments. And that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I love talking about books with you guys. I love hearing your comments, and I love seeing your videos too. So honestly, if you comment on my video, I will check out your channel. I love finding people. I just learned from Kayla at Books and Lala that you can search on YouTube, BookTube, and then sort it by most recent, and you can find people that way, which is so helpful. I would love to talk to you down below. If you took part in either of these readathons, if you read any nonfiction in November, if you're planning on reading anything fun in December, do let me know. Or if you just want to talk about anything else, let me know. Love to talk about it. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe, that's even better if you want to see more content like this. And if you want it to kind of pop up on your phone and let you know whenever I post a new video, you can hit the little bell icon in the corner and it will let you know. Alrighty guys, I'll talk to you next time. Bye!